Hello, this is Gallifreyan Jedi speaking, and I would like to welcome you to my YouTube channel. And for this month's blog, the month of September, I will be doing it on the topic of Star Wars Mythology number 3, the Galactic Republic, Part 2. If you remember from last month's blog on Star Wars Mythology number 3, the Galactic Republic, Part 1, I said that I was going to divide this topic of the Galactic Republic into two parts, primarily for time, the length of time given to each. So in the first part, which I did last month, was on a little bit of the history on the formation of the Galactic Republic, and then but the bulk of it was on the infrastructure of the Republic. Galactic Republic, or as we learned since the time of the Galactic Empire, it was referred to as the Galactic Republic was referred to as the Old Republic. But I studied and went into some depth on the infrastructure of the Galactic Republic, such as talking about its system of government, the Galactic Constitution, information such as that I've covered in part 1 of the Galactic Republic. But in Part 2, Star Wars Mythology number 3, the Galactic Republic Part 2, I plan to exclusively cover the history of the Galactic Republic. That's going to be my focus for this month's blog on the history of the Galactic Republic. And there's going to be a lot of information given for a period of 25,000 years of history since the Galactic Republic was formed in the year 25,053 BBY, before the Battle of Yavin. The Galactic Republic was in existence since the signing of the Galactic Constitution. But I covered that last week, so I don't want to rehash stuff that I've recovered I talked about last month. But I do want to give you my outline so you know where I'm going with the vast history that I'm going to be covering. There's 7 parts I'm going to be covering, from the earliest days of the Galactic Republic all the way up to where where the movies start, episodes 1 through 6 of Star Wars. And so let me list them for you. Well, number 1 will be the early history of the Galactic Republic. Number 2 will be the Old Sith Wars. Number 3 will be the New Sith Wars. Number 4 will be the decline of the Galactic Republic. Number 5 will be the Clone Wars. Number 6 will be the end of democracy in the Galactic Republic. And finally, number 7 will be the legacy of the Galactic Republic. So hopefully I gave you a general sneak preview outline of where I'm going with the history, and you can easily follow that. But with no further ado, I think it's time to jump in and dealing with the history of the Galactic Republic. And I've put this as my third section, or actually part 2, for the topic of the Galactic Republic. And remember, history of the Galactic Republic, I initialed with the Old Republic, because now, ever since the time of Palpatine's New Order and the rise of the Galactic Empire, and also the reestablishment of democracy under the new, from the EU material, the new Republic. This period is referred to as the Old Republic. It was once known as the Galactic Republic, but now it's known as the Old Republic. So with no further ado, I think it's time, because there's a lot of information I have to cover. Hopefully forgive me if I make some mistakes on this, but there's a lot I do want to cover, and I think it's important for those who are Star Wars fans and want to know more about the Galactic Republic, which stood before the time of Palpatine's rise to power and dictatorship over the galaxy. So anyway, let's jump in with the early history. Like I said, the early history is the first part. So during the early years of the Galactic Republic, the government on Coruscant expressed a desire for slow expansion throughout the galaxy, despite its promotion of hyperspace exploration. But despite that, the Republic boomed during its first millennium, as thousands of worlds joined the Republic for protection against the Hutts, the Hutt Empire. During those times, both the Jedi Order and the ancient armies and navies of the Republic defended against defended it, yeah, against violence. Interesting to make note there that this expansionist era, during this expansionist era of the Galactic Republic, they really didn't desire or didn't express a desire to quickly expand throughout the galaxy and bring planets and star systems into their system of government under their collection or under their form of government, democracy. But it inadvertently, one of those serendipitous things, it happened. It just happened. I guess ambition grew beyond what their original intentions were. And you could see that the Hutts, right at this point, before there was a lot of other, before the Sith and before other alien or from the EU, like before the Yuuzhan Vong invasion and stuff like that, the Hutts, carrying a criminal empire but a race unto themselves, they felt that they needed protection. So a lot of the planets had joined the Republic for protection against outside threats, which the Hutt Empire was probably the greatest threat at that point. And you notice here that, which we're going to get to, you remember I said that at the time of the unprecedented peace that they had for the last 1,000 years, well, in which at the end, when the Clone Wars started, they created the Military Creation Act, allowed the use of the clones from Kamino to be used in the Clone Wars. Hence, that's why they called it the Clone Wars, primarily. But before that, centuries back, they did have their own. The Jedi Order worked with the Galactic Republic in unison, and the Republic did have their ancient armies and navies for defense. They created for defense, and of course, the Jedi Order joined whenever there was a threat. The Jedi became part of and led the ancient armies and navies of the Republic. But moving on, in the year 24,500 BBY, remember BBY stands for Before the Battle of Yavin, in Episode 4, A New Hope, the first Great Schism occurred, in which the Legions of Lettow were established by dissident Jedi who believed that the true power of the Force was achieved not through passive meditation, but through passionate emotions. Tensions was created between the Jedi Order and the dissident Jedi who had fallen to the dark side, which grew until a conflict erupted. Interesting. Now, keep in mind, before 24,500 BBY, there was no Sith, and there was no organization of any Dark Jedi, or what they refer to as the Dark Jedi. Keep in mind, just to let you know, that there is a distinction between what a Dark Jedi is and what a Sith is. Somebody be the Sith. They're the same, but the Sith is an order, just like the Jedi Order is an order. So you can have somebody who's Force sensitive and trained in the Jedi arts, but not be a part of the Jedi Order. The same thing with the Dark Jedi. You can have an evil Jedi, someone who's gone down to the dark path, he's on the dark side of the Force, but they're not part of the Sith Order. So just to give you a little bit of background on that. But this is the first time in 24,500 BBY that there was a schism between Jedi who turned to the dark side of the Force and felt that was the true power through passion and emotion instead of passive meditation. And those were the first times that the first times the Dark Jedi had arisen. And like I said, I don't know if there was individuals who practiced the dark arts of the Force and the Jedi prior to that, but this is the first time they became organized, and the conflict arose between the Jedi Order and these Dark Jedi who had a different philosophy of using the Force. It's primarily the dark side of the Force. But anyway, moving on, in the year 24,000 BBY, it's 500 years later, prior to that date when the first Dark Jedi had become split apart from the regular Jedi Order to practice the dark side of the Force. The Galactic Republic entered into the Tionese War against the Honorable Union of Desevro and Tion. This war was fought up and down the Curly Main route, as both the planets Coruscant and Desevro both suffered heavy bombardments from pressure bombs. The Republic ultimately won that war by stirring up the Hutts against the Tionese. Within a century after the Tionese War, most of the Tion cluster swore allegiance to the Republic, except for Desevro, which chose to remain independent. Interesting, this is one of the earliest major conflicts that the Galactic Republic faced with this Tionese War, and you can know as the results. It's interesting how they used the Hutts. The Republic were able to draw the Hutts in to end the stalemate against them, again, in that war, and being able to help the Republic win in the Tionese War. And that's how the Tion cluster was absorbed into the Republic, and how it became part of the old Galactic Republic. And of course, the conflict that they had with the Union of Desevro, the planet Desevro, decided to remain independent, so they allowed a form of democracy there, allowing them not to have to be forced into becoming part of becoming a member planet of the Galactic Republic. But anyway, moving on. Okay, between the years of 20,000 BBY to 17,000 BBY, which is equivalent of, looks like equivalent of 3,000 years later after the Tionese War, was the time of the Great Manifest Period, as the Galactic Republic expanded eastward towards the galaxy. Eventually, the Republic expanded past the galactic north and southern borders of the slice, though most of the galaxy was still unknown. The section of the galaxy west of Coruscant still remained unexplored, since analogs of the Perliman trade route and the Corellian run in that direction still had not been discovered. At this time, progress was limited to a couple of light-year jumps into a stretch of hyperspatial anomalies. Also during this time, the expansionist region was formed, but this region suffered greatly as a result of the Al-Sakan attempt to gain control of the Galactic Republic from Coruscant. The result of this was the Alaskacan conflicts, in a span of 17 conflicts from the year 17,000 BBY to 3,000 BBY. Interesting, because this is what I basically just covered there, was talking about the directional expansion, or shall I say, exploration of the galaxy, the different parts of the galaxy, whether they refer to it as north or south, west or east. So eastward, they first spread eastward, then southern into the, northern and southern areas of border of the galaxy. Now the west will be conquered later, but a lot of that remained at that particular time, remained unexplored, and was not in analogs of the permanent trade route. So that's what became, or the Corellian run, to the essentially they remain unexplored and uncharted worlds at that particular time. Now this is going way back. This is going back 17,000 years. So obviously many parts of the galaxy were not discovered. Almost like what you see in Star Trek. They're exploring parts of the Milky Way galaxy that haven't been charted or explored by the Federation. Anyway, back to Star Wars. This is, even though they had the hyperdrive propulsion system, their travel was limited to a couple light years jumps, and into a stretch of hyperspatial anomalies, essentially. So that's essentially how they traveled. It's not how their spaceships travel now in the current era where the movies are, episodes 1 through 6. This became known also. That's this time, around 17,000 BBY. The expansionist region. Remember the regions like the core worlds, the colonies, then the inner rim, and then beyond the inner rim was the expansion region. That's when the expansion region came into the area which is known as the expansion region, came into power, or shall I say, absorbed into and became members of the Galactic Republic. But this resulted in the Alsacan, war with the conflict with the Alsacan conflicts, and over 17 conflicts, between 17 conflicts, they fought with the Galactic Republic, trying to gain control of the Galactic Republic from Coruscant. But anyway, I don't want to get too far off on that. Let's move on. In the year 15,500 BBY, the Galactic Republic had a disastrous first contact, and as a result, Coruscant was assaulted by Star Dragons and the Duin contention. Please forgive me; it's a very difficult word to pronounce. Duin contention, if I'm pronouncing that right. I apologize if I am not. Ultimately, the Republic was able to resolve the conflict peacefully by Supreme Chancellor Florian and the Star Dragon philosopher of Bors Maltau, whom together founded the University of Coruscant, and later in the later period 12,000 BBY, the Galactic Museum was established in Coruscant. So that's interesting that this is one of those conflicts that the Galactic Republic encountered, which they could have ultimately gone into a major war, which they did. They did previously, a couple thousand years back with the Alsacan conflicts. But this is one of those conflicts that they were able to resolve peacefully. And they developed the arts on Coruscant. They developed the University in Coruscant, and also the Galactic Museum, to study the history and the arts. So that was interesting how they were able to resolve that in a peaceful, very peaceful fashion. Not so with the rest of their history, but that's one of the examples they were able to resolve it, in which the Republic grew. The Republic grew from that, in their knowledge and in their culture, etc., etc. Anyway, moving on. In the year 12,000 BBY, Contispex I became Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. He and his descendants belonged to the theocratic Pius Dia cult, which would control the Republic for the next 1,000 years. This dynasty of the Supreme Chancellor sanctioned crusades against rival alien sects in the Rim. I mean, whether it be inner Rim, mid-Rim, or outer Rim. After 11,000 BBY, the cult dissolved in a violent fashion. These crusades would create tension and deepen the rift between the core worlds and those from the Rim. So interesting that this Supreme Chancellor was almost acting as a dictator, but creating a theocracy, not just a dictatorship, but a theocracy carrying out crusades. It didn't do too well between the Republic's exploration and inclusion into their system of government, the government of the Galactic Republic. The Eternity essentially is a very violent theocracy, trying to rein his view of government and religion down these other civilizations, including alien sects and the alien races, throughout the galaxy, throughout the mid-rim, the inner rim, mid-rim, and outer rim. Excuse me. So it was one of those things, even though they don't talk about it too much, there was a combination or a blending of church and state, for lack of a better term, quote-unquote church and state, that they blended, which they wouldn't, but it ended disastrously and very violently for the Supreme Chancellor and his descendants, the descendants who were, following that for 1,000 years. But anyway, I don't know if there's much more to comment on. And moving on, in the year 9,000 BBY was known as the Riantist period, where Blotus the Hutt, it's very, very funny if you think about it, Blotus the Hutt became Supreme Chancellor and ruled the Galactic Republic for 275 years. Unlike most other Hutts, Blotus was a distinguished and just ruler. By the year 7308 BBY, the Galactic Standard Calendar was fixed. So now keep in mind with the Galactic Standard the Galactic Standard calendar. I don't think I've never, they never written up a calendar for the Star Wars universe, which they should. I think that would be a great idea if they did, but they didn't. That's why we go by BBY and ABY after the Battle of Yavin, before the Battle of Yavin. That's the way fans have measured time in the Star Wars universe. But they did have, supposedly they did in 7308 BBY, they did create the standard calendar, which I'd be interested to see. But the distinguished factor was, out of all races, you would think that how could a Hutt being elected as Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic? Well, he was probably, which I'll say, the bad, not the bad seed, maybe that's not. He was, the rebel child of the Hutt race and the Hutt Empire, because Hutts essentially are brutal. They're like gangsters. They rule like tyrants. And they're crime lords. You can see this in the movies, like Jabba the Hutt being a major crime lord on the planet Tatooine. Well, Louis the Hutt was one of the rare birds. He was, probably one of the only, as far as I know, was one of the only Hutts that became not only member of the Galactic Republic and the Galactic Senate, but became Supreme Chancellor. That's a big thing. But his personality was very different than your average Hutt, because his mind wasn't on greed and power like the rest of the Hutts were. He was very much a rebel in that stance, that he became a very distinguished, just ruler, very philosophical and just ruler. But you didn't see that. That's probably one of those things. It's like a rare bird or rare meteorite. It just comes and it goes, and you don't see it again. That's almost like what I think about when it comes to the Hutts, or Lotus the Hutt, his role over the Galactic Republic, his term as leader of the Galactic Republic. Moving on. And in the year 7003 BBY, the Second Great Schism occurred, when a group of fallen Jedi discovered a Force technique that could alter life forms. This started the centuries-long 100-year darkness, which saw the creation of monstrous creatures. Now, interesting enough, we talked about the First Great Schism, which was when the Jedi rebel against the Order to study the dark arts of the Force, to study the dark arts and practice the dark arts. Now we see this great second schism coming into effect, which now these dark Jedi are using the dark side of the Force to create, almost like an island of Dr. Moreau, create these mutant creatures. He's taking life and mutating it, their genes and DNA to, almost in the form that they view themselves as almost like gods or so. But they did that. That was the beginning of the Second Great Schism, when they started practicing the dark side of the Force for the creation of monstrous creatures, genetically manipulating life forms. So that happened. That happened at 7003 BBY. So yeah, that's right. I got the right year. And this started what they call the 100-year darkness. But let's move on. Oh, by the way, almost forgot. Something that came to mind. In that period of the 100-year darkness, with these ancient dark Jedi, these fallen Jedi, manipulating the genes of life forms, I'm wondering if Darth Plagueis the Wise, remember what Palpatine said to Anakin, that he believed, his master, or Darth Plagueis the Wise, he had the ability to create a living being, manipulate the midichlorians to create a living being. And I'm wondering if that reaches back to these practices here. But interesting, that's a question that can be brought up and debated at a later time. But anyway, moving on. In the year 6900 BBY, the Battle of Corvus took place, in which the Jedi defeated these Dark Jedi, and as a result, the Jedi banished these Dark Jedi from the known galaxy. After their excommunication, these Dark Jedi discovered the planet Korriban, which later in the Clone Wars series renamed Morban, which was a desolate world inhabited by the relatively primitive but unusually force-sensitive Sith race. When these Dark Jedi practiced using the Force before the primitive Sith race, the Sith saw them as deities and worshipped these Dark Jedi as gods. These Dark Jedi became the rulers of the Sith race. And as a result of the years past, interbreeding occurred between the Dark Jedi and the Sith. The term Sith, quote-unquote Sith, came to mean not only the original inhabitants of Korriban, but also the Dark Jedi, but also their Dark Jedi masters. So this is very important because within the Great Schism, there was a battle, a war that took place after the 100-year darkness period, and the first conflict that really came, the first war that really came between the Jedi Order and the Dark Jedi was this time, and they banished them because I guess the area of Korriban. Now keep in mind, Korriban, again retitled Morriban and the Clone Wars, same planet, just had just a little bit different names. They called it. This was the original home planet of the Sith, because the Sith used to be a race of beings, a distinct race, just like human, just like just like Ithorian or Wookiees. They're a distinct race of beings. And at the time, the Sith were a distinct race of being, dark beings. So when Korriban wasn't in the Republic, or in the area of the Republic, so and they exiled these Dark Jedi to to an unknown part of the galaxy. So, and what happened was they discovered Korriban and lived on Korriban because they were worshipped by these Sith, these very primitive Sith race, taught them the arts of the dark side, and then interbreed with them. And then eventually, the Sith became known as an order of beings who would practice the dark side of the Force and had their own rules and laws which to follow, just like the Jedi Order. These Dark Jedi formed their own order after interbreeding with the Sith and teaching them the dark ways of the Force, and the Sith became known as an order rather than just a race. But this is far back in the ancient times, almost 7,000 years prior to where the movies are at, episodes 1 through 6. So, but at first, it's interesting, they were able to do this because when they landed, it's just like almost like, and I've mentioned this in other blogs before, but whenever you have like a primitive race, first contact between a primitive race and this advanced technological race comes and visits them, their powers, especially presenting this dark side of the Force, their powers, they viewed these Dark Jedi as gods, and they worshipped them as gods. And so later, when they interbred with them, the Sith became, obviously they must have been near human in order for some of the Dark Jedi humans to be able to interbreed with the Sith. But the Sith eventually, after interbreeding with them, the Sith, like I said, became known as an order. So you could, not just a race of beings, but an actual order. That was the process. That's very important. I'm probably going to cover a lot more of that topic when I do my blog on the Sith, which I do plan to have sometime in the future have a blog on the Sith. But anyway, let me move on. I think it's important that I move on, not spend too much time. In the year 5000 BBY, the Jedi Order had their first conflict with the Empire of the Sith Order in the Great Hyperspace War. The war was very costly with casualties on many planets, but the Jedi were able to defeat the Sith invaders, and as a result, the Republic granted the Jedi land over the Force Nexus, which was a sacred mountain on the planet Coruscant over the Jedi Temple was constructed. That's very interesting. 5,000 years prior to the movies, the movies and the Clone Wars series, whatever. It's what I called the modern era of Star Wars. 5,000 years prior, the Jedi Order entered into their first major war. I mean, they had the conflict, the Second Great Schism, which they forced the Dark Jedis out of the known galaxy. But now you had a war because these Sith. Oh, let me back up. These Sith now were more sophisticated because they actually grew as an order with laws and codes of conduct, just like the Jedi Order has. So they're a little bit more than just a handful of Dark Jedi. Now they've become an entire organization, just like the Jedi Order, and became, you know, sort of, I don't want to say they're equals, but, you know, you heard the term, they met their match. Well, yeah, because the Jedi Orders were equal in power, or it wasn't just a minority of Dark Jedi. Now these Sith were turned into a great order, a gigantic order, and a power in the galaxy. And they went to war, and against the Jedi went to war against the Sith Order. This was the first contact. I mean, remember, prior to that, the Sith Order didn't exist prior to the Dark Jedi discovering Korriban and, you know, basically being worshipped as gods and interbreeding with them and changing into the Order. So when the Sith Order finally came into being, 5,000 years BBY, that's when the Jedi Order had their first major conflict, first major war. It was very costly with many casualties. It was almost like the first galactic war that they had on a galactic scale. But the Jedi ultimately were able to defeat the Sith, and they gave them, and the Republic rewarded the Jedi for helping by giving them that Force Nexus, and which was a sacred mountain on Coruscant over which the Jedi Temple was constructed. So I don't think I need to make any more comments about that. Now, let's move on. In the year 4250 BBY, the Third Great Schism occurred, which involved fighting on Coruscant between the Jedi and the Dark Jedi. The Jedi were again able to defeat the Dark Jedi, but the Dark Jedi were forced to flee Coruscant, and they fled to the Voltaire system. While there, the Dark Jedi discovered ancient technologies, suggesting that the system's worlds were artificially constructed, which were probably the creations of the mysterious Celestials who had also built the Corellian system. These Dark Jedi took over these machines, but they could not control them. And soon these ancient technology ultimately destroyed the whole system and everything in it during the Voltaire cataclysm. So interesting, they discovered technology, these Dark Jedi, after fleeing off Coruscant from their conflict with the Jedi, came and found these ancient, very powerful tools, the age of powerful technology. And interesting because it's suggesting here, remember I talked before, especially on my first Star Wars Mythology on the Galaxy, the Corellian system was suspected to be artificially created by a race of Celestials. Well, this technology was believed also, very possibly believed to be, used to belong to them when they were in the galaxy, but abandoned because they're either no more, they've moved on, or they're gone. But of course the Dark Jedi didn't really know how to work them, and basically it was, they destroyed their whole system, destroyed themselves, and destroyed their whole star system while trying to work with this ancient technology, which they had really no knowledge of how to work with it. So that was known as the Voltaire cataclysm. But moving on, around the year of 4000 BBY, 40 Jedi Masters, 2 Warrior Masters, and 2 Sage Masters established the ziggurat of the Jedi Temple of the Force Nexus on Coruscant, which would stand for over 4,000 years. So 4,000 years before the movies, before Episode 1. 4,000 years, yeah. The Jedi created their Jedi Temple, and that became the Jedi Temple for 4,000 years, until obviously the Great Jedi Purge. But anyway, I don't want to go into that right now. I think that's pretty much self-explanatory, so I'm going to move on. Now we're moving on to the next section, known as the Old Sith Wars. Okay, so we're marking part 2. We dealt with the early history, now we're dealing with the second part, the Old Sith Wars. In the year 4015 BBY, the Great Droid Revolution began on the planet Coruscant, led by the HK-01 droid, who was eventually defeated by Arc-Jeth and the Jedi Knights. During this conflict, Archijeth discovered techniques for disabling machines through the use of the Force. So obviously this Archijeth was a Jedi himself, but he led the Jedi Knights to defeat the droid revolt. And you know, if you played Knights of the Old Republic 1 or 2, you remember the HK droid, which I loved. That was one of my favorite characters when playing that game. But the HK droid led this revolt, known as the Great Droid Revolt, and that's, as far as I know, that's the only major revolt, because you think a society that had millions, the Galactic Society that had millions of droids, that, who knows, maybe the artificial intelligence, just like in other science fiction movies, like the Terminator, they would want to take over. Well, this is the only example of that, when they wanted to sort of take over and conquer. There's not a whole lot in Star Wars universe on droids. You know, humans are living beings fighting droids, other than what we see in the Clone Wars. But the Clone Wars weren't against beings fighting against droids. It was a droid army working for other living beings. But anyway, let's move on. In the year 4000 BBY, following those conflicts, were those of the Old Sith Wars, which almost destroyed the Galactic Republic. During the time of the Great Sith War, from the years of 4000 BBY to 3996 BBY, the Sith Lords Exar and Ulic Qel-Droma, along with their Krath and Mandalorian allies, waged war on the Republic. In which caused the great devastation until the combined forces of the Jedi and Republic military were able to defeat them. So, interesting enough, now the Jedi under Sith Lords of, the Sith, they've entered into their second Great War with the Sith Lords, leading Exar and Ulic Qel-Droma, leading them, along with Krath and Mandalorian allies. They were trying to conquest, but of course they were overcame, because at this time the Republic did have a military and a navy, an army and a navy. And the Jedi, again, just like the first time, what we saw with the previous war, that the Jedi led the Republic military and defeated the Sith Lords along with their allies, the Krath and the Mandalorians. But anyway, let me move on. During the year 3966 BBY to 3960 BBY, that was approximately 6 years, the Mandalorian Wars occurred, where the Mandalorian forces were trying to expand their colonies beyond the Outer Rim territories and the Galactic Republic, as the Republic feared further incursion from the Mandalorians. So again, now, even though they were defeated with the Sith, now starting in 3966 BBY, the Mandalorians were a warrior race. Again, I'm going to be doing a blog sometime in the future on the Mandalorians, talking about the history. Very much like the Sith, the Mandalorians were a specific race, coming from a specific race from Coruscant, and they later became, when they interbred and went out in the stars and interbred with other humans or other living beings, because they were originally near humans, the race of Mandalorians, and then they became human after a while. So the Mandalorians was an organization rather than a race. So, same way with the Sith, same with the Mandalorians, that they both started out as a race but then became an order, an empire, shall we say. Okay, so let's move on to the Mandalorian Wars were a prelude to the more devastating Jedi Civil War, which occurred from the years of 3959 BBY to 3956 BBY. The Jedi Civil War, also known to some as the War of the Star Forge, was a conflict fought between the Galactic Republic and the Sith Order, under the leadership of Darth Revan and Darth Malak. The Jedi Civil War was possibly the most destructive conflict of that entire era, with many worlds, including Taris, Dantooine, and Telos IV, being devastated by the Sith fleet. And of course, a lot of those events were either dealt with or talked about in the Knights of the Old Republic RPG game and Knights of the Old Republic 2. I haven't played the Old Republic, the online MMO, so I can't tell that. But that's where the events of that occurred with Darth Revan and Darth Malak. And it talks about the devastation that happened in that war by the brutality of the Sith fleet, and to cause destruction on the planet Terrace and Dantooine and Talos 4. But anyway, moving on. During the years of 3970 BBY to 3670 BBY, the Kanz Disorders took place in the Kanz sector. At this time, the provisional governor, Muriel of Argsda, ordered a succession from the Republic and established a military regime throughout the Kanz sector. During the conflict, Governor Muriel had her military forces invade the planets that were resistant to her reign throughout the Kanz sector. When conquered, she often would enslave their inhabitants. The Jedi and Republic finally challenged the Kanz Disorder, and they were able to defeat the Kanz Disorder. Interesting, a self-proclaimed despot that, being a provisional governor, becomes a self-proclaimed despot and tries to basically annex her entire quadrant. And the planets that didn't go along, she conquered them and enslaved them. But again, the force of Jedi, along with the Republic military, because keep in mind the Republic did have, the Old Republic, or the Galactic Republic, did have a significant military back in those days. And with the leadership of the Jedi, they were able to defeat her and the Kanz Disorder. And defeat the Kanz Disorder. So anyway, moving on, in the year 3700 BBY, the pioneer women of Brentel 4, the pioneer women and Brentel 4 native Freya Kalia discovered the Hydian Way, which spanned the entire north-south width of the galaxy. This opened up the galaxy for the Galactic Republic even further into the Mid-Rim and Outer Rim, with worlds they could explore, colonize, and bring into the Republic. This resulted in the discovery of more hyperspace routes, which started a second expansion wave. So interesting that this move to discover the Hydian Way, if I'm pronouncing that way, Hydian Way, basically opened up the more of the north and south borders of the galaxy, and which resulted in a second great, remember the first great expansion? Well, this resulted in a second great expansion where they were able to explore, chart, and bring other planets into the Galactic Republic. But anyway, let's move on. Okay, in the year 3681 BBY, the Sith Order returned to wage war against the Galactic Republic. War against the Galactic Republic, in the conflict known as the Great Galactic War. During this war, the Republic was greatly weakened, which culminated in the sacking of Coruscant, as well as the signing of the Treaty of Coruscant in the year 3653 BBY. This treaty placed many major burdens on the Galactic Republic, which resulted in a large economic depression that engulfed the Republic, which caused a slowdown with the rebuilding process, installing efforts to restore peace. The Treaty of Coruscant forced the Republic to abandon many of their loyal allies, including the Baldan race. In addition, the Republic was forced to relinquish control of many planets to the Sith Order, in which it resulted in the Republic being in an unfavorable position, which resulted in many star systems withdrawing from the Republic. During this time, the Republic was plagued with an insurmountable supply crisis, as well as causing chaos in the streets of Coruscant. While the Galactic Senate was left paralyzed, this was extremely troublesome for the Senate, so they blamed the Jedi for the Great Galactic War and unfavorable results of the Galactic Republic. This immediately caused a feud with the Jedi Order, in which the Jedi left Coruscant and relocated to their ancestral home of the planet Tython. After the Great Galactic War, the Cold War began, which lasted for 11 years before the unstable peace collapsed in the year 3642 BBY, beginning the Galactic War. Now, the Great Galactic War, the Galactic War, I want to emphasize, it's not to be confused with the Galactic Civil War that you saw in episodes 4, 5, and 6 of the movies. So they're different. They're different wars, and they're referred to. I guess they refer to the Great Galactic War because of the massiveness. It was a galactic spanning war that happened. But the Sith again went to war against the Jedi, and it really was a downtime. It was where the Republic was being not so much crushed, but suppressed, and this caused major economic depressions and other things that really started the decline of the Galactic Republic. And of course, the Senate, with some of their political corruptions and expediency, found the easiest way to do it is just blame it on them, blame it on the Jedi. Well, the Jedi had conflict with this, and then they left the Galactic Republic for a time and went back to their home planet of Tython. Then there was a Cold War after that. I mean, because keep in mind the Sith were able to conquer a lot, and it was this treaty or whatever wasn't really favorable for the Republic, and it only hurt them all the more. But it established an uneasy peace, an unstable peace, which was a Cold War at the time between the Sith and the Galactic Republic. But then but later on, in 3642, the Galactic War took place after that. But anyway, moving on, we're going on to the third part. We've dealt with the early period and the Old Sith Wars. Now we're going on to part 3, which is the New Sith Wars. Okay. In the year 2000 BBY, the Republic once more faced the menace of the Sith Order and what became known as the New Sith Wars. The Jedi finally came back to the Galactic Republic as the Jedi took the forefront of the war. The conflict went on for quite a while until the Battle of Mizra in the year... excuse me for that. The Battle of Mizra in the year 1466 BBY, in which resulted in one of the largest victories for the Sith Order in the entire war. This war was very costly for the Republic, for they had overwhelming casualties and losses. And as a result of this, the Republic entered into a dark age, with widespread social unrest and economic collapse. So it's very interesting. In the conflict again with the Sith Wars, which is now referred to as New Sith Wars, didn't help the Republic a whole lot, because keep in mind they were socially and economically being repressed by the conquest of the Sith, their war with the Sith, and now in this conflict they were even suffering a lot more casualties and a lot more damage to their society and to their economics. But the thing is, what eventually saved them was the Jedi eventually came back, and basically they put themselves on the front lines to fight against the Sith, which is what was needed. But anyway, moving on, keep in mind this is because of the suppression, the social and economic depression of the Galactic Republic during these years, or during these centuries. It was known as a Dark Age, just like Earth. In Europe there was a Dark Age throughout the Middle Ages, where there was their own Dark Age that they had. But anyway, moving on. During the Dark Age of the Galactic Republic, the Republic shrunk in size to a mere state surrounding the core worlds, inner colonies, and a few other planets outside it. This led to the Sith Order encompassing the majority of the rest of the galaxy. When this happened, the Jedi took over the absolute authority of the Republic, temporarily ruling what was left of the Republic and absorbing the Republic's armed forces into the Jedi Army Light. So this time, instead of Keep in mind that, just like I said, that there was a depression on the size, the economics, the socialness, the social and economic. There was depression in Galactic Republic. They lost a lot of their territory and allowed the Sith to gain power and to gain control over those areas where the Galactic Republic was not functioning well, and had to pull back and basically surrender a lot of their territories and planets to the Sith. Well, at this time, the Jedi came back to Coruscant, but instead of joining the Republic military as its leaders or even as followers in the Republic armies and navies, the Jedi actually took over. They had to temporarily, I don't want to call it a coup d'etat, because it technically wasn't a coup d'etat. The Republic was somewhat willing to allow this to happen, because it wasn't going too well between their conflict with the Sith. And of course, being the Sith used the dark arts of the Force, they practiced the dark side of the Force, that it needed the Jedi to win this victory. And essentially temporarily taking over the Republic and absorbing the Republic's armies into the Jedi armies of the Army of Light. But anyway, moving on. This war continued for almost 500 years as a war of attrition, in which the Jedi Army of Light had several major successful battles with the Sith Order, as the Jedi were able to push the Sith back to the planet Ruusan. It was there on Ruusan that the Jedi were finally able to defeat the Sith during the year 1000 BBY at the 7th Battle of Ruusan. Also, as well, an unfortunate result, the majority of the Army of Light forces that were on Ruusan also perished along with the Sith. After the Sith were defeated at the 7th Battle of Ruusan, there was one lone Sith survivor who was named Darth Bane, in which he initiated the rule of two, meaning that in any given time there would only be one Sith master and one Sith apprentice. The Sith Order continued this method over the next millennium in secrecy and subterfuge, awaiting patiently for the right moment to take on their revenge against the Jedi and to conquer the Galactic Republic. And I think that's very significant. Remember I said that the Jedi had now taken over the Galactic Republic willingly by the government, because they were in such a crisis with their wars against, and they weren't doing too well. They were losing the wars with the Sith Order. The Jedi came back to be defenders of the galaxy and fought the Sith all the way back to the planet Ruusan. And it was 1000. This is very significant. 1000 BBY at the 7th Battle of Ruusan that they were able to defeat. There was great casualties, many thousands in this campaign on the Battle of Ruusan, or the seven battles of Ruusan. Many Jedi, thousands of Jedi perished in that war. Also, thousands of Sith also perished. And another problem they had is not only were the Sith trying to be at war with the Jedi, but they were at war with themselves, because you know the old saying, too many chiefs, not enough Indians. At the time, there's thousands and thousands of these Sith who were being killed, but they were also fighting with each other and killing each other off, almost in a way helping the Jedi defeat them, because that was part of their defeat. This is part why they were defeated at the 7th Battle of Ruusan. They were able to defeat them. Darth Bane, who was one of the final survivors of the 7th Battle of Ruusan, reformed it, because he knew that the Sith lust after power, and if you have thousands of Sith, everybody's going to be wanting to be the ruler, and it's going to destroy them. If you fight against yourself, along with fighting an enemy on the outside, you're going to be defeated. So he decided, well, we're going to keep a low profile, one master and one apprentice. And of course, everybody knows, which I don't want to go into too far detail until I cover my topic on the Sith. Everybody knows that how they raise up in rank is when the Sith apprentice feels confident enough that he could take out essentially murder his master, and then he takes over the master, and he takes on an apprentice. So that's the order that Darth Bane took 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, before the movies, 1,000 years essentially before the movie, before the movies. That's the setup of the Sith Order by Darth Bane. And basically they were going to keep the hiding in secret, use subterfuge. And when the timing was right, which was the timing of Darth Plagueis, and then of course when, and you know, by the time of the movies, time we get to Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, with considering Darth Plagueis, who trained Darth Sidious, and Darth Sidious was the one who decided he was going to reach out now, take his revenge. If you remember in Episode 1, where he's talking with Darth Maul, and they say, finally, we're going to reveal ourselves to the Jedi. We're going to get our revenge against the Jedi. And that's what happened. Order 66, the Great Jedi Purge, was their revenge against the Jedi. And they were going to use that opportunity to take over the galaxy, which was their initial plan to begin with. So anyway, it was instead of an outright war, it was sort of waiting to the corruption and the Galactic Republic society and government became so bad that one leader could rise up and take that power. One of the Sith Masters could rise up and take that power, which we know as Star Wars fans is Palpatine, Emperor Darth Sidious, aka Palpatine, Supreme Chancellor / Emperor Palpatine. Hopefully I don't go crazy on that one, but I don't know, overdo it. But anyway, let's move on. Following the 7th Battle of Ruusan, the Ruusan Reformation was enacted by the Chancellor Tarsis Valorum. Sounds like maybe he's an ancestor of Finis Valorum, who was the Supreme Chancellor in Episode 1, Phantom Menace. The Ruusan Reformation saw that power was returned to the Galactic Senate, as well as placed the Jedi Order under the authority of the government of the Galactic Republic. As a result, the Galactic Republic entered into an unprecedented millennium of peace, so they decided to disband the vast majority of its remaining military. And this is very significant, because after the 7th Battle of Ruusan, the Jedi claimed, the Jedi finally claimed ultimate victory over the Sith, not knowing about Darth Bane, because he and his apprentice disappeared, and the Sith Order was only going to appear again when it was time, it was right, which was what happened in Episode 1, Phantom Menace. So anyway, they disappeared, but the assumption that both by the Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic was they finally defeated the Sith, and they brought peace back to the Republic. And the Jedi, but there needed to be a Reformation Act, because they would, rightly so, that the Jedi Order shouldn't be the rulers. Again, maybe this lack of a better expression, but a separation between church and state, because the Jedi Order are somewhat religious in and of their own. They have certain spirituality with the Force that they practice. So there shouldn't be a theocracy of Jedi controlling the Republic. It was turned back over to the government and the senators of the Galactic Republic. And so they did that. They returned, since the threat of the Sith was over, the Jedi handed their power back over to the Galactic Senate, and they chose to elect a new Supreme Chancellor for the Galactic Senate, and that's how the power of the Republic was turned back over to the Galactic Senate. But they also did something else incredible, not too wise, but because they entered into this, assuming that there was no more major conflicts with the Sith or even the Mandalorians at this point. They felt that they didn't need to, they demilitarized, deconstructed, or shall I say, demilitarized their entire armed forces, their armies, their navies, or whatever, and they basically left it up to the Jedi Order to be defenders. So anytime a skirmish broke out or any problems, they relied on the Jedi to take care of that, to essentially police the galaxy, be policemen of the galaxy. And as their role, they took on for themselves is they were going to be defenders of peace and justice throughout the galaxy, throughout the entire Republic. So, not a wise thing, which we'll discuss in a little bit here. Okay, let's move on. At long last, peace and prosperity came to the Galactic Republic. Yet with it came a dangerous form of complacency. The Republic's vast armies and navies were considerably downscaled, as the Republic put the burden on the Jedi to be their sole defenders and keeping the peace throughout the galaxy. In spite of this, a few isolated incidents, like the Star Hyperspace War and the Battle of Naboo, a full-scale galactic military conflict remained a distant memory. So that's the reason why, because they had the skirmishes with particular planets. Like, for instance, as mentioned here, because I was just mentioning about how the Jedi Order, the Republic came to rely on the Jedi Order to be their policemen. While the same thing that happened with Battle of Naboo in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, that was considered a skirmish on one particular planet, not galaxy-wide conflict. The Republic, unwise, shall I say, I'm trying to think of the best word to use this, unwisely thought that this was the end, that they didn't have to worry about any outside conflicts coming to threaten the Republic. So they demilitarized their entire armed forces and relied on the Jedi to be the peacekeepers over skirmishes, settle skirmishes, and be the peacekeepers. Essentially, I guess I can leave it at that. But moving on, we've done 3 of them. We've done the early part of the Galactic Republic, the Old Sith Wars, number 2, the New Sith Wars, number 3, and number 4, which we're doing now, is the decline of the Galactic Republic. Okay. As the Galactic Republic grew more powerful, especially during the millennium of unprecedented peace throughout the galaxy, was a complacency among the Republic's government, resulting in most of the bureaucrats and senators growing increasingly corrupt. The bureaucracy had grown and festered over the millennium, which was destroying any attempt for social justice throughout an effective government. Throughout the Galactic Senate, many senators became increasingly corrupt, using their office to further their own agendas and greed, rather than working for the constituencies of their region. From their corrupt greed, many senators sided with the galactic corporations like the Trade Federation and the Techno Union, and as a result, these corporations grew more powerful and even formed their own militaries. So that becomes a major problem when they're forming their own militaries, when the Galactic Republic doesn't have its center on its own military to resolve any kind of conflicts or wars, for allowing these corporations to essentially build their own military. But the problem is that at the time, these senators were growing more corrupt. As time went on, peace went on. Not to sit there and say it's good to have conflict because it only brings honest men out, because no, it's not the fact of doing something to make somebody honest or dishonest. It's just the soul, and basically the soul of the Galactic Republic, which was building for longer than that 1,000 years peace, was actually corrupt in its heart. And the corruption was going there. There was honest senators, but they were on the slim. Majority of senators were there for their own things, so they can maintain their own interests, whether it be money and wealth, power, or prestige, or certain things like that. And if social justice was in the way, well, they would just ignore it or suppress it, because bringing social justice to their constituency was not first priority. It was way down on the list. Using their office to further themselves was probably the chief end of their motives. But anyway, moving on. After a millennium of peace and prosperity, and the year 32 BBY, Palpatine was a senator from the planet Naboo. The Trade Federation invaded Naboo, and the planet was under siege. Padme Amidala was elected Queen of Naboo, where she left her home planet to go to Coruscant in order to plead with the Galactic Senate to take immediate action against the Trade Federation. Unfortunately, because of the corruption and apathy among the senators, the call to condemn the invasion was tied up in bureaucratic procedure. Queen Amidala was infuriated by the lack of support from the Senate, so she called for a vote of no confidence in the leadership of Chancellor Finis Valorum, which he done under the persuasion of Palpatine, so that Chancellor Valorum was impeached by the Senate and he was voted out of office. This led to Palpatine's promotion, with being voted as the new Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. And you can see that well, I don't need to go over too much of the events. You just have to comment on some of these events. You've seen Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. That's exactly what that story was about. So I encourage you to see that if you haven't seen it. Well, what happened was, as you know, remember I discussed under their form of government, their laws, and the infrastructure of their society and government, the Republic, from last month's blog, that they had the Senate could call for a vote of no confidence and to remove as the Supreme Chancellor if they felt he was being ineffective to the cause of the laws of the Galactic Republic. Well, Chancellor Finis Valorum was a very weak leader, and manipulated her. Palpatine manipulated her because he was only a senator from Naboo, same planet as Padme was from, Queen Amidala, shall I say, that he encouraged her to call for a vote of no confidence, in which he was. He was impeached and removed by the, and that was devastating for him because he had put a lot of, he had a good relationship with Padme, but she felt it was necessary because he was being influenced by the corruption in the Senate, and was a very weak leader, that she needed to, do this painful act of calling for a vote no confidence. And of course, that was Palpatine's role, because then he it's like episodes 1 through 3 had that slow progression from being a senator going all the way up to being dictator of the entire galaxy. So Chancellor Finis Valorum was removed, impeached, and then removed from office, and there was a new election, and of course Palpatine was able to win, and he became the Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. So I think I covered everything with that, but let's move on. We're going on to the, I've already talked about the early part of the history of the Galactic Republic, the early history. Number 2 was the Old Sith Wars. Number 3 was the New Sith Wars. Number 4 was the decline of the Galactic Republic, and I covered this 4. Let's go on to number 5, which is the Clone Wars. Dealing with the Clone Wars, which is very important because that brings us up to the movies, which we see so we can all relate to what's going on in Star Wars history. Then approximately a decade later, after the Battle of Naboo, the galaxy faced a separatist crisis when several of the Republic's star systems and commercial organizations were disgruntled and disguised with the corruption and apathy that plagued the Senate and the Galactic Republic, decided to unite and succeed from the Republic, in which this unified front became known as the Confederacy of Independent Systems. By the year 22 BBY, a cooperative peace treaty was unable to be agreed upon and signed by both sides, so tensions grew between the Galactic Republic and the Separatists, until it escalated to all-out war, which infamously became known as the Clone Wars. Interesting in that many people, now if you remember, how shall I say this? If you remember in the text, the crawl text of Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, it said there is good and evil on both sides, because the Separatists, which I'm going to be covering in a future blog, the Confederacy of Independent Systems, which their nickname became the Separatists. There was many senators and planet leaders of particular planets and senators who felt that the Galactic Republic became so corrupt there was no turning back. The Galactic Republic was just going to decay more and more. So their solution was, just like very similar, not exactly the same, but very similar to our American Civil War, is just like you had the states in the American Civil War wanting to secede from the Union, but you have star systems and sectors of the galaxy wanting to secede from the Galactic Republic, and that was very problematic. They did not want that, nor could they afford that, the Galactic. But because they were uneasy, in 22 years prior to the Battle of Yavin, 10 years after the Battle of Naboo, or the events in Episode 1, Phantom Menace, the Confederacy of Independent Systems was formed, and they were unable to come to a peaceful resolution, and unable to agree to a treaty, and that created the tensions for both sides. Because keep in mind, even though the leaders of the Separatists were run by the likes of Count Dooku and who am I thinking of? The leaders of all the leaders of the Separatists, like from the corporate sector, like the Trade Federation, the Techno Union, the Banking Clan, and Interplanetary Banking Clan, that and also General Grievous, who was leader. Those people were evil. They had their own selfish and greedy intents, greedy or power hungry. What's the word I'm thinking of? They had their own ambition. Basically, there was many senators and planetary leaders who formed the Confederacy. Who formed the Confederacy. Who wanted to do it because they truly felt they were fighting against corruption. Because there was definitely corruption in the Galactic Republic, but this was the conflict. It's like a very gray area, and Palpatine was manipulating that because he had Count Dooku and Grievous and those other leaders trying to lead the Separatists into war, essentially. They led them into war, and which became known as the Clone Wars. Let's move on to read this. The Clone Wars began on 22 BBY when the Jedi Strike Team, along with clone troopers, came to the planet Geonosis to fight against the Separatists and the Droid Army, which was known as the First Battle of Geonosis. As a result, the Senate granted Palpatine emergency powers to deal with the Separatist crisis, in which Palpatine immediately used his ever-increasing power to create a grand army of the Republic, in which a vast army of clone warriors were to serve as the Galactic Republic's fighting force against the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Throughout the previous millennium, the Republic did not see an army, since until then any small conflicts with the Republic could be solved or recourse by the peacekeeping Jedi. However, due to the fact that the Separatists had access to an enormous army of droids, forced the Republic to construct a more formal federal military from clones created from Jango Fett's DNA in order to be able to effectively fight. I don't want to go into too much detail of explaining, because I'll do that later when I do a blog on the Clone Wars, which I do plan to. But Sifo Dyas and how the clone army was created by the Kaminoans. Well, I'm not going to go too far into that, but for right now. But suffice it to say, the Military Creation Act that they needed to create. Because remember, in the beginning of Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, you remember that Mace Windu said to Supreme Chancellor Palpatine that, remember that when war starts, we're supposed to be peacekeepers, but we're not an army. You need an army. Essentially, he was saying you need an army, which they ultimately did. They used the clones that were created on Kamino as their army. And the reason why they did that is because they basically mothballed their entire military forces, or most of their military forces, in which they needed to create, because the Separatists, or the Confederacy of Independent Systems, had there because the International Banking Clan, the Techno Union, and also the Trade Federation joined the Separatists, and they had a massive army of droids. Well, the Republic needed a massive army, which is why they used the clones from Kamino that were taken from the DNA of Jango Fett. Jango Fett was a bounty hunter, but also a Mandalorian bounty hunter, which is interesting. But anyway, let's move on. In spite of the fact that the majority of corporations and guilds sided with the Confederacy of Independent Systems, there was one enemy of the Galactic Republic that managed to turn away from the Separatists and allied itself with the Republic, who was Jabba the Hutt and his criminal organization. Jabba sided with the Republic because they rescued a son, whom was secretly being held captive by the Separatists. Thus, the Republic had some advantage over the Separatists during the war. Along with their allegiance with the Hutts, the Republic was allowed to use Hutt hyperspace lanes. So basically that event comes from the Clone Wars movie. Remember the Clone Wars movie that came out in the theater first? And that was the introduction for the series. That's where those events had taken place. But moving on, as the conflict of the Clone Wars continued onward, the Galactic Senate increasingly gave Palpatine more powers, who became the war political commander-in-chief. The Senate justified their actions in the name of security, where eventually Palpatine did not need the approval of the Senate for many of his actions. Supreme Chancellor Palpatine maintained the loyalties of a vast majority of the Senate. During the time of the Clone Wars, the citizens of the galaxy, who had long since lost faith in the corrupt and inefficient Republic itself, came to see Palpatine personally as a protector from the threat of the Separatist War and their vast droid armies. Now that's very significant because, like I said, we talked about when I talked about how Palpatine rose to power from in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, how he went from being a senator now being elected to Supreme Chancellor, manipulating that. The next thing is just slowly shred the Constitution about the limits of power for a Supreme Chancellor and give him more and more power so he could stay longer in office. He didn't need a new election. He stayed there for the duration of until the Clone Wars, agreed that until the Clone Wars got resolved that he would step down. But that gave him more power, so he didn't have to step out of office, and people couldn't elect a new leader or choose to remove him from office. So that gave him the power over that. And at the time, they constantly saw, because through the inefficiency and the corruption of the Galactic Senate, even through weak leaders and corrupt Supreme Chancellors in the past, they saw Palpatine as somebody who's getting something done. So that appealed. It's kind of like the blind factor that Palpatine had. That Palpatine appeared to the people as their savior, not knowing he is the most ruthless dictator about to take over your society. So that's very significant in understanding what was going on in the prequel trilogy. But essentially, that was what was happening at the time, that that Supreme Chancellor Palpatine was just constantly manipulating the Constitution to shred the Constitution, manipulating the Senate for more power, to be given more power, and they didn't even see it until it was too late. They did not see it until it was too late, until he had almost all absolute power over the Galactic Republic and the entire galaxy. Okay, moving on. We're going on now to the next section. I've reviewed the early, number 1 for the first part, the early history. 2nd, the Old Sith Wars. 3, the New Sith Wars. 4, the decline of the Galactic Republic. 5, the Clone Wars. Now we're going on to number 6, which is the end of democracy. Let's go on. As time went on, tensions between the Supreme Chancellor Palpatine and the Jedi Order grew, as the Jedi Council became increasingly concerned with Palpatine's lust for greater power. As Palpatine continued to increase his power through a variety of emergency powers, the Jedi became ever more suspicious of Palpatine's intentions, and they ultimately disapproved the Republic's gradual slide into autocracy. Autocracy. Yeah, if I'm pronouncing that right. So you can see now the conflict is happening with Palpatine manipulating the Senate to give him more emergency powers. Fear does that to you. Fear, essentially what Palpatine did during this time of the Clone War crisis, or what they call the crisis of the Separatists, is they feared everything is going to come unraveling apart, and they thought that their solution was to give more powers to one man, a man who's willing to stand. Of course, he's willing to stand up because he has that domineering autocratic, domineering, like a dictator. You know, he has that motivation and that power, mental power, to be able to make decisions and carry them out. But there was conflict because there was many people that continued to, you know, that there's some people, especially the Jedi, who were concerned that he was holding on to too much power for too long, and that shouldn't be. There should be a gradual slide back to the Constitution, obeying the Constitution of the Galactic Republic, you know, the Galactic Constitution. But anyway, moving on. Anakin Skywalker informed the Jedi Council that Palpatine was actually the elusive Darth Sidious, Dark Lord of the Sith, and thus the Jedi immediately acted to arrest Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. The Jedi's attempt at a coup d'etat ended in complete failure as Palpatine overcame 4 Jedi Masters, including Mace Windu, and Palpatine ended up killing all four of them. After murdering 4 Jedi Masters, Palpatine wasted no time by responding with a declaration that all Jedi are the enemies of the Galactic Republic, which won the support of the Senate. After portraying them as assassins bent on taking over the Republic, Palpatine enacted Order 66, which became infamously known as the Great Jedi Purge, in which the Sith finally were able to take their revenge against the Jedi in an attempt to destroy the entire Jedi Order in one swift blow. Without any warning, the clone troopers betrayed and murdered most of their Jedi officers that were spread thinly throughout the galaxy. So essentially what you have here, well, we all know because those are the events that have taken place over Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and also especially Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Order 66 was the Great Jedi Purge. But see, that's the thing. It was only after it was revealed, because keep in mind, the Jedi didn't know at that time who was the Sith Master. They knew he was somewhere in the Senate, Galactic Senate, serving as, but they didn't know who he was. And when it was revealed that it was Palpatine, then it all clicked together. It's like, you know, seeing the forest through the trees, or whatever expression that you want to call it. They knew what was going on. They tried to have him removed. Of course, he killed them. And he ordered 66. Now, I'm going to be dealing with, when I talk about the Clone Wars or the Great Jedi Purge, I'm going to be talking about more about this. But, you know, it was sort of like all the Jedi were spread out. See, majority of the Jedi were in the temple, the Jedi temple, or on Coruscant. Most likely, they could have overcame Palpatine and taken him out before he was able to seize control of the entire Republic. But they were spread out, and they didn't have any thought. There was a hidden program inside the brains of these clone troopers. And once Palpatine gave it the Order 66, it was sort of like they were brainwashed, like you see in the Manchurian Candidate sort of thing, kind of thing, to carry out their assassinations. And since the Jedi were spread out all over the galaxy, fighting on various worlds, were light years apart, the clone troopers turned on them and shot each one to death simultaneously as one swift blow. And like I said, they just like what happened under the previous wars with the Sith, the Jedi had to come in, take over the Republic, but that was temporary, and this was going to be temporary. This coup d'etat, taking out the Jedi taking out Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, coup d'etat was essentially going to be temporary. In their spirit, in their mind, it was temporary until the deal with the crisis, dealing with the crisis, the separatist crisis, and also their own internal problems with a Sith operating amongst their ranks. They had to, it was going to be, I'm getting too far off the track, but essentially they had to, essentially trying to take him out of office through a coup d'etat and take over was essentially temporary. But when Palpatine killed the 4 Jedis and were able to act in Order 66, he told the Senate that they had become assassins, that they wanted the true power, which is not true at all, because it was lies. It was lies mixed in with truth. But anyway, what happened? Well, everybody knows what happened after that. Then that Palpatine declared himself, renamed himself Emperor instead of a Supreme Chancellor. Emperor meaning he's the absolute dictator, and rechristened the Galactic Republic into the First Galactic Empire. But let me move on. In the year 19 BBY, the Clone Wars ended with the onset of the Great Jedi Purge. And as this was going on, Palpatine addressed the Senate as he declared the rise of a new order, as he rechristened the Galactic Republic into the First Galactic Empire, as well as proclaiming himself as Emperor of the Galaxy. When that happened, it ended the 25,000 years of a democratic republic, as it was transformed into the absolute dictatorship of a totalitarian empire, ruled by a megalomaniac autocrat, whom was Palpatine, being the supreme despot. When Palpatine made his declaration in the Senate, the majority of the Senate cheered him on loudly in approval. Essentially, essentially, they gave. George Lucas always said in interviews that the theme of it was not an outside influence coming in and conquering their galaxy. That it was opposite. It was internally how the galaxy turned into a dictatorship. But why, if people willingly handed over all these powers over? Some of it was because of corruption, and others who were a little bit more honest, basically thought that they had achieved, they were going along with it because they thought that ultimate peace and security was being achieved by Palpatine, unknowing what he was going to do or who he truly was. But basically, and then the few who were spoken out against that, the few senators who were not honest senators, who were not keen on him taking absolute power, making himself emperor, and turning the republic into an empire, those who spoke out would ultimately find their demise. They would be assassinated somewhere or taken and imprisoned. So that's what happened with that. But anyway, let me move on. The Galactic Senate became a powerless Imperial Senate, which remained as the last symbol of the Old Republic. The Senate was nothing more than an inefficient advisory board that Palpatine used to his advantage until his reign was completely consolidated enough for him to rule the galaxy without any form of bureaucracy. After 2 decades, Palpatine finally dissolved the Senate, with the last remnant of the Old Republic destroyed by the very man whom they supported. The role of the Senate was distributed to the Moffs and regional governors, all of whom were empowered to rule over their respective territories in the name of Emperor Palpatine. And that brings up a good point, because if you remember in Episode 4, A New Hope, where, well, first of all, let's go back to Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Remember when the Bail Organa's Blockade Runner was coming back to Coruscant for a meeting of the Senate, and they were questioning maybe Palpatine's done away with the Senate, and they said at the time he couldn't, because if he removed it right away, it would have been too catastrophist for the galaxy to have that kind of change put on them so soon, that they would ultimately lose control. So they used the Senate to keep control of the Republic, or what was left of the Republic, until by the time Episode 4, which is 0 BBY, because that's when the Battle of Yavin took place in Episode 4, A New Hope, that basically Palpatine was at a spot where he can give all the power to the regional governors and also to the Moffs, like Grand Moff Tarkin. Tarkin was a Moff, and basically dissolved. That's at that time when he has dissolved the Galactic Senate completely. So interesting enough. But anyway, let's move on. Okay, so far we're going to go on to the next section, and I've dealt with the early history, the Old Sith Wars, number 2, 3, the New Sith Wars, 4 was the decline of the Galactic Republic, 5 was the Clone Wars, and 6 was the end of democracy, and now we're going into the final plot, number 7, the legacy of the Galactic Republic. So let's go on to read that. Barely a year into the reign of Emperor Palpatine, the Empire's precursor state became known as the Old Republic, quote, Old, unquote, Republic, mainly to emphasize that the Republic's fall and the creation of the Galactic Empire. During Palpatine's reign, he gradually eliminated all of the remaining symbols that reminded the imperial populace of their democratic past and heritage. The history and legacy of the principles of the Old Republic were secretly held by a growing number of citizens who became disillusioned with Emperor Palpatine and the Galactic Empire, due to their oppressive measures that Palpatine enacted to further strengthen his hold on the galaxy. So essentially, those who disagreed, who tried to hold on to the principles, ultimately, those who disagreed tried to hold on to the principles of the Galactic Republic, even though they were now esteemed in the Galactic Empire. It's essentially, some of them became known, which I'm not going to go into today, as forming the organization of the Alliance to Restore the Republic. So we'll talk about that in a future blog, that I will do on that topic. But moving on, by the year 2 BBY, Emperor Palpatine's tyranny motivated many citizens of the galaxy, especially dissidents within the Imperial Senate, as well as the Alliance to Restore the Republic was formed, thus initiating the Galactic Civil War. 6 years later, at the climactic Battle of Endor, both Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader died, which resulted in a major victory of the Rebel Alliance and the decline of the Galactic Empire into chaos and disorder. So essentially, I gave you, essentially I don't need to make too much comment on that because basically everybody knows those are the events that happened between the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy. The Alliance to Restore the Republic was formed by those who cherished the democracy of the Republic and wanted to restore freedom, justice, and freedom to the galaxy again. And that war was known as the Galactic Civil War, which happened through episodes 4, A New Hope, episode 4, A New Hope, to episode 6, Return of the Jedi. So, anyway, I mean, as I mentioned, 6 years. Yeah, basically, if it's 2 BBY, then it would be 6 years, because Galactic Civil War lasted for 4 years. And at the climactic Battle of Endor, that's when Palpatine and Vader died, destroying the Sith Order, and then the results of a major victory of the Rebel Alliance, which they were able to restore peace and freedom, justice and freedom throughout the galaxy. But anyway, hopefully I'm going to end it there. Hopefully I did a good job at explaining the history of the Galactic Republic, but I think it's wise enough at this time now to stop and call it a day for here. Call it a day. Since I dealt with a lot. This is a lot of material I had to deal with. But thank you for watching. I wanted to thank you for watching my video. Everybody who watched my video, I am very appreciative of it. And I also want to say, if you like my video, please subscribe to my channel to get all the latest updates. I want to mention that I'm happy because I finally have made it to 1,000 subscribers, and that's a milestone for me. And I want to thank everyone out there who watches my videos and who has subscribed to my channel, because I cherish you. I cherish you guys. Even if you disagree with me, I very much cherish the fact that you're willing to subscribe to my channel and watch my videos. So I do thank you for that. My next one, since I finished off this topic on the Galactic Republic Part 2, since actually the whole topic was Star Wars Mythology number 3, the Galactic Republic. My next vlog for the month of October will be Doctor Who Mythology number 3, Skaro and the Daleks. But anyway, with that being said, I think it's time for me to end this. I wish everybody have a good day, and may the Force be with you.